Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for another deep dive. This time we're tackling a case that, well, it's one that really stays with you, the Kelsey Barth case. And to really get into it, we're using this True Crime with Kendall Ray episode as our guide.
Great episode.
Oh, for sure. It's a tough listen, but so well done. And you know what really struck me? We have to talk about Kelsey. Like, really understand who she was before all of this went down.
Absolutely. In true crime, it's easy to get caught up in the investigation, the suspects, all of that. But we have to remember there's a real person at the heart of it.
Exactly. So let's start there. Who is Kelsey Barth, based on what we learned?
Well, she was young, driven. We're talking about a woman who achieved her dream of becoming a pilot. She even worked with the Air Force as an instructor.
Wow.
Right. Talk about high achievers. And then she moves to Colorado for love, starts a family. And here's something that really stuck with me. When she had postpartum anxiety, she sought help.
That's huge. And it's something I always find myself thinking about in these cases. It would have been so easy for that detail to get lost, right?
Absolutely. It kind of goes against any accusations that might come later, any attempts to, I don't know, paint her in a negative light.
Yeah.
It tells us she was proactive, strong, putting her well-being and that of her daughter first.
It just makes the whole thing, I don't know, it makes the loss of it all hit even harder, you know?
It does. And when we start to unpack how this whole thing unfolded, it gets, well, it's a lot to process. There's confusion, conflicting stories.
Yeah.
It wasn't immediately obvious that this was even foul play.
Right. It's not like those cases where you're like, oh, okay, this is clearly a murder.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's walk through those initial days then. What do we know about Kelsey's last known whereabouts, according to the podcasts?
Well, the last confirmed sighting of Kelsey was on Thanksgiving Day. She was at the grocery store with her daughter. But after that, things get murky. Fast.
Murky how? Like, what kind of details are we talking?
We've got strange text messages being sent from her phone. Her car is found at her home, but her keys are missing. It's just this jumble of information that doesn't immediately scream murder, you know?
It's like a weird, unsettling puzzle. Not the kind with, like, a clear picture on the box. More like those ones where you're just hoping some pieces fit together at all.
Exactly. And that's what investigators were dealing with, right? They had these pieces of information, these odd details, but they didn't quite form a coherent narrative.
Right, right.
It's easy to look back with hindsight and say, oh, that was a clear sign. But in the heat of the moment, with so much unknown, it was far more complicated.
So we've got this puzzle with some pieces missing, and the ones we do have, they don't quite fit yet. But even still, even early on, there were these red flags, things that just felt off.
Oh, absolutely.
What were some of those that stood out to you from the episode?
Well, the whole thing with Kelsey's handgun, for starters,
Right.
there was talk, speculation about her maybe being suicidal.
Yeah.
And then, in the middle of all that, Patrick returns her gun.
See, that always gets me. Like, if you're genuinely worried about someone, that's the last thing you do.
Exactly. It's almost like, I don't know, it's like he was trying to plant that seed, steer the investigation in a certain direction.
Oh, totally. It's like way too calculated.
Right. And then there's what wasn't missing from her house. Or rather, what was missing.
Okay, you're going to have to explain that one. What do you mean?
Her essentials. Like her toothbrush, her makeup, the things you just don't leave behind if you're going off somewhere.
That's a really good point.
It's like, if she'd just run off, wouldn't she have taken more than just the clothes on her back? It's those little details.
Hectic volumes.
Exactly.
It's giving very much, this wasn't randomly tossed, it was placed.
Yes. Deliberate. Like he was trying to throw everyone off the scent.
It's just, and this is where Crystal Lee Kenny decides to enter the picture.
Right.
A character who, let's be real, she does not come off well in that podcast.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And her entrance, it just throws another wrench in the whole thing.
It complicates things even more.
Because remember, up until this point, the investigators, they're kind of stumbling around in the dark.
Yeah.
But when they discover Crystal's connection to Patrick, the past relationship, the suspicious calls between them during all of this, things start to become a little clearer.
Crystal clear.
Maybe not that clear.
Okay, fair enough. But we do need to talk about Crystal's confession, because the podcast, they describe it as a jaw on the floor kind of moment. So walk us through it. What did she reveal?
Buckle up. Because this is where things take a very dark turn.
Okay.
According to Crystal, Patrick had been planning to kill Kelsey for months. And get this, he even involved Crystal in multiple attempts beforehand.
Multiple attempts. Like, hold on, what are we talking about here? What kind of attempt?
Okay, so the first plan involved poisoning Kelsey with a spiked coffee drink.
Seriously, like, what is this? A bad spy movie?
Right, it sounds crazy, but that was the initial plan. Crystal even went as far as going to Kelsey's door with the poisoned coffee.
Oh my gosh.
She ultimately backs out, but still. Then there were 2 other attempts, both involving weapons that Patrick gave her, a metal pipe and then a baseball bat to hurt Kelsey. But again, she couldn't go through with it.
So how does it escalate from there? Because obviously something happened.
Well, according to Crystal, after her 3rd attempt failed, Patrick was getting frustrated. So on Thanksgiving Day, while everyone else is celebrating with their families, he goes to Kelsey's home and, using this whole ruse about wanting her to guess the scents of different candles, he gets her to close her eyes.
Oh no.
And that's when he attacks.
With the baseball bat, while their daughter was there,
Yeah.
it's just, God, the cruelty.
It's awful.
Mm.
And then, according to Crystal, he puts Kelsey's body in a tote, drives to his family's Thanksgiving dinner, and acts like nothing happened.
Like he just compartmentalized a whole other reality. And Crystal, she comes back into the picture to help cover it all up.
Yeah, cleaning the crime scene, helping him burn Kelsey's remains, getting rid of evidence.
And all this time, Kelsey's loved ones are left wondering what happened. And those texts, the ones from her work about missing work, the one to her mom saying she'd call back, those were all Patrick and Crystal.
All a carefully constructed lie.
Just designed to buy them time and throw everyone off their trail. It's sickening. So, okay, we have the murder, we have the cover-up. But what about justice? Was Crystal's testimony enough to actually put Patrick away, even without a body? So Crystal's confession, as messed up as it was, that's the break in the case.
Yeah.
But was it enough to actually put Patrick away? I mean, they didn't have Kelsey's body, right?
It was a tough case for the prosecution,
Yeah.
for sure. Nobody, really speaks to the skill of the legal team, how they pulled everything together without that.
So how'd they do it? What were the strongest parts of their case?
Well, a lot of it hinged on what's called circumstantial evidence.
Okay.
So basically, it's like a puzzle, but instead of a picture, you're building toward the conclusion. All these individual facts, when you look at them all together.
They paint a pretty clear picture.
Exactly. And they had to get creative, use everything at their disposal, phone records.
Surveillance footage, I bet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know how Patrick's story about that day was all over the place? Well, the phone data. It put him right there at Kelsey's place when she was murdered.
Busted by the digital trail happens every time.
Right. And they weren't just looking at his phone either. They traced Kelsey's phone too. Her movements after the murder, specifically that trip to Idaho, matched up perfectly with what Crystal described.
Whoa.
And then the icing on the cake, surveillance footage.
Oh, there it is.
Yep. Hard to argue with the video. Backed up so much of what Crystal said, showed Patrick's movements, even saw him driving with that black tote.
Chills.
And on top of all that, get this, there was testimony from Patrick's own brother. Oh, yeah. He's a police officer. And he even noticed something was off with Patrick at that Thanksgiving dinner. Said he parked way far away from the house, like he was hiding something.
Wow. Their own family. That's gotta sting.
It does. And it just gets worse from there. Remember that hit list Patrick made while he was in jail?
Yeah.
Kelsey's family was on it. Crystal, too.
God, that's just evil.
It's cold. But yeah, with all of that, even without a body, they made a really strong case.
And it's stuck.
It did. Patrick was found guilty on all counts, got life in prison without parole.
I gotta say, even though no amount of time can ever bring Kelsey back, knowing that, it's a little bit of comfort, knowing he can't hurt anyone else.
Absolutely. A little sliver of justice for Kelsey and her family. And, speaking of her family, I have to say, their strength throughout this whole thing, it's remarkable. And that aviation scholarship they're starting in her name, it's just, it's beautiful.
It really is. Taking something so awful and finding a way to make something good come out of it.
Exactly.
It makes you think. These cases, they're tough to hear about. Kelsey's story, it's a reminder that this can happen anywhere, to anyone. So to everyone listening, let's try to remember that. Look out for each other. If something feels wrong, if someone needs help, say something. You never know. Your voice could make all the difference.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. But as always, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next time.